What do you want?
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and Meg's beating heart. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Bride of Reanimator. This 1990 horror comedy takes place 8 months after the original and continues the adventures of Herbert and Dan. They, by which I mean Herbert, have a new interest in creating life from various bits and pieces of bodies which he often manipulates into gruesome new creatures. This research comes to a head when they find the heart of Megan Halsey and set out to create the perfect woman for Dan to love. With Stuart Gordon busy with Robot Jocks, producer Brian Usna took the helm as director. This was only his second directing credit, coming hot off his masterpiece Society. The screenplay was co-written by Silent Night Deadly Night 4's Woody Keith and Dementia's Ricky Fry. The production was ridiculously rushed and they only had 1 month to finalize a script. The story was once again based on H.P. Lovecraft's stories though, so they at least had something to work from. Luckily, Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, and David Gale return as Herbert West, Dan Kane, and Dr. Hill. Sadly, Megan Halsey stayed dead, so no Barbara Crampton this time around. The titular bride is played by Kathleen Kinmont from Halloween 4 and She-Wolves of the Wasteland. It also stars Claude Earl Jones from Miracle Mile and Fabiana Udinio from Austin Powers. Music was once again handled by Richard Band, and cinematography was handled by Society's Rick Fitcher. Anthony Dublin returned to make special effects for the film, who was joined by Mike Deek and Wayne Toth from Magical Media Studios, Greg Nicotero, Robert Kurtzman, and Howard Berger from K&B Effects, and Nasty Bug extraordinaire Screaming Mad George. Those are some fucking powerhouse names in the special effects industry. I scoured the internet, but for the life of me I could not find out if Bride of Reanimator had a theatrical release. If it did, it was super limited, but if you happen to know, let me know down below. Either way, it wasn't loved by critics though, who found the story less cohesive this time around, character motivations hard to follow, and the comedy a bit too overpowering. It currently has a 37 and 45% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it was clearly a disappointment to many fans as well. But for fans of ridiculous practical effects, there's still a lot to love in Bride. I've only seen it once, and that was a few years ago when I was binging the whole trilogy, and this is probably the one I remember the least about. I love the main cast members though, so I'm sure I'll at least have some fun with it. I hope y'all are ready to see a dog with one human arm, cause we're watching Bride of Reanimator. The movie opens with Dr. Hill's severed head calling West a bastard and promising he'll get his revenge. Now we jump to Peru 8 months after West and Hill wreaked havoc on Miskatonic. Herbert and Dan have joined the military as medics where they have plenty of bodies to examine during a civil war. Speaking of, they have just failed to save this shrapnel-filled gentleman, so West breaks out the reagent. Journalist Francesca enters the tent and says they must evacuate just in time to see West shoot the angry reanimation. She is concerned with whatever they are doing, but again pushes that they need to leave, and Dan agrees. West disagrees, reminding Dan of how much they've learned and how lizards are apparently the key to their research. A bomb blows into the tent and West finally agrees it's time to go, and he hurriedly collects his notes and iguana. A rebel bursts in and attacks West, but Dan manages to take him out with a machete. West shoots 2 more and drags the injured Dan away, telling him it's time to go home. Cue the badass opening credits, we love it. And just like that, these boys somehow have jobs at Miskatonic. Dan and Herbert are checking in with patient Gloria, who is basically sick from the neck down, so you can see where this is heading. Off she goes for surgery, and Dan tells West that even if she dies, he cannot experiment on her. Pathologist Dr. Graves is visited by Lieutenant Chapman, who has just discovered an important piece of evidence from the Miskatonic Massacre. Hill's head was found in a carnival sideshow, and Graves shows him the other equally undecaying specimens from that night. While visiting the furnace, this guy named Ernest mentions various body parts have been going missing from the fridges. I wonder who could be responsible. West's pilfering leads him to the massacre evidence, and he just happens to find Megan's heart as well as Dr. Hill's head. He immediately starts talking shit, explaining that his head and body functioning separately prove that consciousness exists in every part of the body. Then he talks some more shit.
No body.
Chapman watches West leave Graves' office, and a nurse mentions to Dan that an officer was looking for him while he holds Gloria's hand. Dan arrives home at he and Herbert's ball or bachelor pad and makes his way down to the macabre little laboratory. Herbert has just busted through a wall, giving them direct access to a cemetery, and he has something exciting to show Dan. He fucking assassinates that poor iguana by inducing a heart attack, and he removes her amniotic fluid, which is basically the liquid a fetus within the womb floats in. He combines it with various chemicals, including the classic reagent. He describes this concoction as primordial ooze, essentially liquid life. Then he creates a fucking sculpture using some wire, some fingers, and an eyeball, but before he can bring it to life, Dan tells Herbert he is moving out. Herbert says he can't turn back now and adds a few drops to the Frankenstein fingers. The shit works and brings it to life, but this only infuriates Dan, who accuses West of simply satisfying his own morbid curiosities instead of helping people. West reminds Dan of when he used his reagent on Meg, and he asks what it was he loved about her. He whips out her heart and proposes that together they cobble together a new life starting with it. Of course, Dan agrees to help, but worries about the police, and as the doorbell rings, West realizes his new pet has scampered off. Chapman lets himself inside, and he questions the two on why they choose to live in an abandoned mortuary. He also questions West on his issues with Dr. Hill as the hand crawls around, and Dan awkwardly tries to catch it. West denies any and all accusations, and as Chapman leaves, he unknowingly squishes the little creature. Meanwhile, Graves has begun experimenting with the reagent and quickly realizes its capabilities. All you damn scientists are the same. The poor bat springs to life and starts flying around the room, also attacking Graves' face. He grabs the bat and cuts its wings off, which made me surprisingly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Dan and Herbert trick Ernest into leaving and snatch a body from the crematorium. Because the first attempt was such a success, Graves decides to reanimate Dr. Hill. The severed head is happy to be awake, and he immediately starts insulting Dr. Graves. Ernest comes to see Graves, who is very excited to show off his talking head. Dr. Hill plays dead though, and once Ernest leaves, he continues berating and getting into the mind of Dr. Graves. Oh, and this was their method for body snatching, which literally gets everyone's attention. Now all of a sudden that journalist Francesca is here, and she and Dan plan a date for the evening. Okay. Chapman waltzes up to Francesca to ask her some questions about Dan, also filling her in about the Miskatonic Massacre and the supposed lunatics that were responsible. The surviving ones are housed in the psychiatric hospital, but Chapman had discovered that they are all legally dead. And Chapman is sure at least one of them was dead at one point, as it was his wife. The reanimations give her a good scare, and Chapman also tells her about Dan being found with his dead, twitching girlfriend in his arms. Guess you've got some shit to think about, Francesca. The boys have made great progress on their Meg 2.0, in which they can use small doses of primordial ooze to connect nerves and tissues without full reanimation. Their plan is to inject the reagent into Meg's heart, which will distribute it to the rest of the body through their homemade circulatory system. Francesca and her dog Angel arrive to make Dan a classic Italian dinner, and Chapman lurks outside because he never has anything else to do. Have some tomato sauce, Daddy Dan. Oh yeah, Daddy Dan fucking loves tomatoes. Ooh, Herbert is having some fun of his own. Oh, this went differently than I expected. Armleg starts whooping West's ass, so he bags it up and throws it into the cemetery, I guess. Aw, I think Herbert is a bit jealous of all that attention Dan is giving her, but at least you get to spend time with Chapman. He stupidly forces his way into the lab and finds a whole bunch of really gruesome shit, to say the least. He's enraged when West insinuates that reanimating his wife was just research, but West fights back, pointing out that his wife was killed by multiple hits to the head, presumably caused by Chapman. Officer Dumbass attacks West and gets a nice whiff of the heart attack gas. Dan comes down and is obviously pissed, and Herbert suggests they just reanimate him and set him loose. Dan agrees, and they also inject his heart to test their theory about circulating the reagent through the veins, and the theory proves successful. Chapman can still speak and attack pretty intelligently, and he nearly shoots Dan before Herbert chops his hand off. Chapman screams in pain and locks the boys in the lab, and Francesca emerges to ask him what's going on. And my goodness, he brutally kills poor little Angel. Dan busts down the door as Herbert makes his way through the wall tomb, but Chapman escapes into the night before they can catch him. Herbert takes the dog corpse and immediately comes up with a fantastic idea I can't wait to see. Francesca, who for some reason stayed after that horrible incident, wakes up to some barking and makes her way downstairs. Herbert tries to stop her, but one-arm Angel says hello and gives her a handshake. Dan comes down and Francesca obviously screams at him and leaves. They return to work the next day, but Dan is no longer interested in collecting the final piece to their corpse puzzle. He confesses to Gloria that he thinks of her as Meg sometimes, and bruh, she dies right on the spot. It wouldn't be Reanimator without a defibrillation scene. Wait, what the fuck are y'all doing now? I don't know if this is a real procedure, but if so, give me a DNR. Herbert calls it, prompting Dan to scream in rage, and Herbert tells his friend to go home. Go home so I can chop your lady friend into pieces, I mean. Oh yeah, Dr. Hill is in this movie, and he commands Graves to take him to West. The doctor refuses, prompting Hill to take control of reanimated Chapman, Mrs. Chapman, and these dudes. But then Graves gags him with an apple and wraps him in a towel and just tosses him into a wastebasket. Herbert has Ernest take Gloria's body to the crematorium, and Francesca shows up looking for Dan, but alas, he is gone. Hey Dan, ready to finish Meg 2.0? Come on Dan, look at all these people we chopped up, we can't quit now. Y'all already know Dan has no mind of his own, so he eventually agrees to help. Meanwhile, Chapman has arrived at the hospital to rescue Dr. Hill, and they force Graves to perform some sort of surgery. We don't get to see quite what it is yet, but poor Francesca gets assaulted by Chapman in the hallway. They attach Gloria's head to the body, but Herbert gets distracted by some movement behind his brick wall. Upon Dan's request, Herbert allows him to inject the reagent into Meg's heart, but the buzzer rings before Meg 2.0 can come to life. Herbert finds a suspicious box on the porch, and Francesca shows up but gets scared into the cemetery. Did y'all know packing peanuts are edible? They're not very tasty though. Dr. Hill bursts out with his brand new bat wings, and Francesca is attacked by Chapman. But then she is saved by Mrs. Chapman, who I guess is either getting revenge or is jealous of the attention he's giving her. I'm not really sure. Meg 2.0 starts gasping for air, and Dan breathes some sexy new life into her. Ooh yes, we love a tall queen. She is quite confused, but Dan simply explains to her that she is alive. Mrs. Chapman chases Francesca inside, and Herbert tries to track down Dr. Hill. I think he actually shoots Hill in the noggin, but doesn't double tap when Dan unveils Meg 2.0. She's actually repulsed by West, which I think is hilarious, and Francesca warns Dan of their impending attack. The reanimations burst in, but West surprisingly bothers to save Francesca. The four of them retreat to the laboratory and start barricading the door, and Francesca sends Dan into confusion when she reminds him that the real Meg is dead. Meg 2.0 tells her to back off her man, and Francesca calling Herbert's work blasphemy brings us a fantastic monologue.
Blasphemy? Before what god? A god repulsed by the miserable humanity he created in his own image? I will not be shackled by the failures of your god.
The ladies get into an all-out brawl, but it is pretty one-sided. Dan eventually tells Meg to stop and calls her a monster, causing her to ask if he wants her after all, but it isn't her body that he desires. She rips out her own heart for Dan, but it's now he finally realizes that this creature is not and will never be Meg. She grabs Dan by the throat, and the reanimations break in and grab Francesca. Herbert bites one of them off, and Meg's body starts rejecting its own tissue and falling apart into a big, beautiful meat pile. Mrs. Chapman starts hitting her husband again, and as West breaks down the brick wall, he is confronted by Dr. Hill. Chapman grabs him and throws him in amongst his bizarre rejections, and the others are dragged in shortly after. Dan manages to fight back as the tomb starts to crumble, but everyone and everything gets trapped as rubble rains down on them. Dan manages to pull himself and Francesca from the tomb, but it's unclear if West survived. The movie ends with a trapped Dr. Hill laughing and Meg's heart giving a few final beats. And that's Bride of Reanimator. It's got some absolutely crazy stuff going on, but I do have some mixed feelings on it. Let me start by saying all of the effects are kick-ass, and the last 10 or so minutes are just a visual feast for people who love practical gore. I wish we got more of those ridiculous experiments, but aside from that, I love the ending. Combs and Abbott carry the film, but all of the performances are fantastic. My main issues lie within the script, which just feels kind of disconnected and jumbled. A lot of scenes are bouncing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's just hard to keep track of who is doing what and when in comparison to other things. It also takes a while for the plot to actually get moving. By the first 30 minutes, very little has actually happened. Obviously, it's building to that great ending, but I wish there was a little more action along the way. I also don't love the more heavy-handed comedy in this one. I prefer the more subtle physical comedy of the original. It was great having David Gale return, although I feel he was a bit underused as well, and I also enjoyed Lieutenant Chapman. I didn't love the inclusion of Francesca. Her constantly returning to Dan just made no fucking sense. I do think Meg 2.0's ending is pretty sad. Kathleen Kinmont kills it with those tragic screams. All in all, Bride of Reanimator pretty successfully captures the absurd feeling of the original while adding even more to the mix, but it does lose some of the cohesiveness in order to have all of those moving parts. It's absolutely worth a watch for the practical effects and the lead performances, but I wouldn't say it reaches the horror, comedy, or drama of the original Reanimator. It's not an especially bad film by any means, it just had really big shoes to fill. Well, that's about it. It took 13 years for Bride to receive a sequel, and next week we'll be seeing if Beyond Reanimator was worth the wait. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and this has been Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Bride of Reanimator. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.